So it falls to me. It doesn't usually fall to me, but it falls to me to welcome everybody to Flâneurs podcast, which is quite nice. Um, so yeah, so because and I welcome. This is the usual tradition with us, isn't it? That I'm welcoming people because I've got a topic that I want to bring up, and many people might have thought this topic was coming up because I at the end of other ones, at the other podcasts, I'm banging on about it. Oh, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. So the topic this week for us is the loneliness of agility coaching. I say the loneliness of agility coaching, but really, I think it's the loneliness of a continuous improvement person. We call it agility coaching a lot now, but it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. We've had that as a topic before, but I will call it the loneliness of the agility coach, whether it's continuous improvement or the consultant as it used to be 20 years ago, just someone who came in and helped people out do different things. But yeah, the loneliness of it. There's a vulnerability to this that I want to sort of invite you to join into. Put myself out there. Worried a little bit that people will then think like, "Oh, this guy is." I think I'm worried that people will think, "Is he lonely?" For one, and be worried about me. And then I think also I worry about as I get into this topic, will people think that I am I don't really know what the word is, but sort of distant from the things that they feel that I'm actually really, really involved with. Is there a level of uh isolation or insulation that I put in? And I'm hoping people don't then think reconsider what our relationships are because
Mhm.
I'm good friends with a lot of people who I've met in the workplace doing
Mhm.
this type of activity. Um, and I mean, I suppose everything that we say, people take in and digest and reconsider. We should reflect, shouldn't we, on given what we know, and if we know something new, we'll reconsider what we knew before. But I hope people still feel that, this is not necessarily about how much I care for them and the problems they had at work and all that sort of thing, and the relationships that we built in the midst of the chaos that we get involved with. But nevertheless, um, I feel there is a loneliness to agility coaching for a number of reasons and a number of things that I want to get into with you chaps. Maybe our listener will join in when we post about it at some point or below the line comments and all that sort of stuff. Um, but I think the first aspect of it that I'd like to invite you to tell me what you think about it is this the fact that it's an isolating role is that we're invited in and we'll often go into an organization and we're invited in under the premise that we will help to change them from what they currently are. And also, whether it's said or unsaid, challenge their way of thinking. And I think when we're first invited in to do that, it's full of good intentions, and it's full of hope. And when we begin to do that, we begin to challenge how people essentially live their lives and make decisions and judge things and so on. Even though we're invited, that can still be, I don't know, like in its most extreme, it can be threatening. And even in its least extreme, it can be very unsettling for people. And those types of emotions can drive a wedge, can't they? They can set you apart. And what we tend to do is challenge the assumed norms in a society.
Challenge the status quo. Yeah.
Yeah, inside what we've entered into. People in there operate in a certain way, whether it's like whether they enjoy doing it. They're basically just, there are elephants in rooms. There are unsaid agreements that are tolerated, not liked. And then we come in and we go, okay, so my job is to point those out and to offer alternatives. And that can immediately make people uncomfortable. And I think that's quite isolating.
Yeah.
So before I go any further into that, what else I think about that, I want to get your view on it. I want to, what do you think about that sort of stuff? And I'm going to throw to Sanjiri, see if you have anything to say.
Yeah, that's a it's often I've often when we scour the different venues and conferences and meetups and um group, things that we're invited to as coaches, as professionals,
Yeah.
I feel like that's oftentimes one of the more, I don't want to say taboo, but it's one of the topics we don't talk about often, right?
Yeah.
We talk a lot about transformations. We talk a lot about leadership. We talk a lot about the difficulty of the day-to-day things we do, different practices, success stories, use cases, et cetera. But we don't talk about the emotional um, load, right, of, the coaching aspect, which includes ethics, which includes, how you walk into systems, how you walk out. We've talked about a little bit. But for me, that's something that I always keep somehow front and center because what I've found is that when we the beauty of our jobs is what's revealed to us, right? And the things we find out, we uncover, and oftentimes there's a discrepancy, 100% of the time for me at least, between what you're expected to do based on what your sponsor asks you to do or reveal, whatever, and what you find out, and whatever that critical path is towards whatever you deem or whatever your sponsor deems valuable. And so um, the things that are revealed and the decisions you take to either be a mirror to reveal those things or action to take place, that can be very, very, very daunting, right? Because you have
Yeah.
to, sometimes it's, the decisions, split decisions you have to make inside of a meeting, or right, because it's an opportunity or whatever. Um, and sometimes that becomes even more complex when, as often is the case, you're dealing with interlaying with other change agents, be they leaders internally, right, or other coaches who work for other
Yeah.
consultancies
Yeah.
or other
Yeah.
firms.
Yeah.
And so you have a slew of different conflicting interests sometimes that can make that coaching path kind of lonely. And then obviously, the other part is obviously, and I dealt with this. This is personally for me was on that path of coaching. There's a sense of humility that I've had to really learn to embrace because, you know, the imposter syndrome thing is often thrown around quite a bit. I think it's actually overused sometimes, but there is a point in time where you're like, am I in the right space? Am I a little
Yes.
bit in over my head? Right. Do I have a good grasp handle? Am I just kind of winging it, trying to figure these things out? And so learning to build those support mechanisms, right,
Yeah.
uh, is has been really for me key and fundamental. And doing this for me with you guys, for example, is something
Yeah.
that's very cathartic and experience in terms of just sharing and just giving me a space to not only articulate, share, but hear your stories as well, hear the things you guys go through, so yeah, I mean that's I feel like it's a topic that obviously I hope this is a spark plug among others that we really
Yeah.
help launch this conversation, because a lot of people don't understand what's really, you know, the underlying peaks and valleys that you go through, right?
Yeah. I mean, that resonates to me that you just said there about the imposter syndrome bit. Well, when you said, in those situations where you feel like am I in the right place? And then you said, am I in over my head? Because I think those are like we run that camera a lot, don't we? And
Mhm.
I often think when I'm in that situation, like it's not about being in over your head.
Mhm.
Like this is my inner voice coaching myself, trying to puff my chest up a bit, and like I might be in the wrong place. Like this might not resonate for these people, but if for people who live their values, it's like, yeah, no, time and time again, I've said this stuff, and it's the right stuff to say. These are the right things I'm pointing out. I can recognize them here and other places. If this doesn't go down well, depending on how seismic the reaction is, I just might be in the wrong place. It might be the wrong time. It might only be about timing. It might be that I say this thing and the backlash is extreme, but it needed to be said, and it plants the seed, and I might get ejected from that place. But months later or years later, the next person that comes in and points that out, those people might have gone like, yeah, we've been thinking about that. They might not even remember that I put the seed there.
Yeah, for sure.
And they don't have to. And what does that matter? But they might go, oh, you know, if I planted something deep in their subconscious that then starts to germinate and grow and then bear fruit, and the person after me is the beneficiary of that, ultimately the beneficiary are those people who invited me in who weren't willing to hear it. And I think what I've just said there is what we talk about a lot. The thing we don't talk about with a lot is the effect that had on me.
Yeah.
Like in that moment, I was like, because one of the things that I say that I've heard myself say lately over the past couple of years, when I feel like I'm in that exact moment, I've I've um I've stated to the room that I'm about to say something to, and I've been explicit about my vulnerability, and I've said, do you know what? I'm going to say something, and my heart is in my mouth. And at that moment, I can actually feel my heart beating. Like, I got to say it, but I don't know how you're going to react. And, you know, there's an element afterwards, I think, as well, that's like, it's sort of like, I'm not just blowing smoke up my own trumpet, if that's the word. But that is the definition of courage, isn't it? Facing those fears and doing what you think is right to live up to your values.
But I want to push on a little bit there, Matt, and this is something I need to work on myself. But in those moments where you say that you have this thing to say, like you have to say it, I guess the question is, do you actually have to say it? Like, do you have to say it? Meaning, you know, and the stuff that you've been talking about, I've been sitting here kind of writing notes and things. I'm like, I don't want to forget these. You know, first we tie back to some of the conversations we've had over the course of the season. There's the conversation about discomfort, right? And growth and discomfort that we tend to make people uncomfortable. And then we go back to our last conversation about the asshole thing. There we go. I'm gonna have to mark this one as explicit too. But I look back at a post that I wrote on Substack when Sanjir and I were going through this ICC cohort together. And there was sort of a click moment for me was, you know, Matt, you had talked about there's these elephants and we might call them out. And so I took this approach of, you know, I saw myself as I'm a coach and I'm here to tell you what's wrong so that you can fix it. And we went through this exercise of appreciative inquiry, which is something that I've decided that I love and I use it and people like it. Where instead of pointing out faults, you work from strengths. And so you don't point, like we explicitly don't go to a place of this is what's wrong. We say, what do we do really well? And we start from that point and we move forward. And so for me, I had that view of my job is to point out what's wrong so that we can fix it. And we also talked about from the book, Reading the Room, the Cantor for 4-player model, where it talks about the different, you can be a mover, a follower, an opposer, or a bystander. And so we did this thing where we placed ourselves where we normally stand. I firmly stand, or used to firmly stand in the opposer. And so I put these things together and I say, okay, I'm telling you what you're doing wrong and I'm opposing everything. my gosh, I'm an asshole. I get it. Like, okay, I get why people are like, screw that guy. Because, oh, did I freeze, or is that just
Yeah,
my
no, but
video?
I can still hear you. Crack on.
Oh, I'll have to restart. And I look stupid. So, anyway, I'll fix it later. So uh, anyway, so yeah, I see all that. And I think part of that gets to first, do you actually have to say the thing, or is there a different, can you approach it a different way? And then also saying from that cohort, Sanjir and I were in, one of our instructors talked about the need to do contracting. And one of the things that he says he always brings up is like, how do you want to act in instances where I think that what you're doing is the problem? And you talk about it before anything actually happens, so that when you get to that point, you've already talked about it. So that you say, okay, we're in this space where I think that something you're doing is the problem. We've already talked about how we're going to behave in this instance, and then you go and take care of it. All right, I'm going to pause and fix my camera and
Yeah,
respond to that.
go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think what I'm saying, what I'm hearing from you, I think is slightly different from what I'm trying to convey. So I get why you're saying what you're saying, and I get how you could have come to that from what I said. There's situations where I'm putting forward my opinion about what I'm hearing. I think I come at. So in retrospect, what I sort of know is that people after that point have said you made very good points, and I think they sort of say you made them well. They don't feel like I was, because I've worked hard at not being threatening. The thing is, over time, you still know that my counterpoint or my different perspective that I've put in there has caused some disquiet, has caused people to reflect on themselves and reflect back that actually maybe my behavior was less than kind in some way, shape, or form, and Matt's pointing that out, and he's doing that in the kindest way possible. Like, and I usually would say, like, I can understand why you're saying these things, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about the person or people in your organization that you might be talking about, or the person or people in the marketplace that might be your customer that you're talking about, and how if you looked at it from their perspective, they might have an equal and opposite reaction to that, or an equal and opposite perspective. And what I usually do is frame it in that misunderstanding one another is perfectly human. So there's no judgment there, but have you thought about the opposite perspective? And the thing is, like, so generally that's what I'll try and do, which is another one of the things I posted about this on LinkedIn in preparation for this, like, what are my thoughts about this? And I did sort of say, like, one of our roles is to be a contrarian, is to not align too closely with any perspective, but just to show that there are others. Just
Even
put that
our
in front
own,
of people.
even our own.
Even our own, yeah, like, and I think I've done that on
Yeah.
several occasions,
Mm.
like, and I may have even described it. I may have even used it to describe the fact that, sometimes it's difficult to see the other opinion, the other side of things, and I'll sort of say, like, I held this opinion for a long time, and then it dawned on me that there were other opinions. So we're all fallible in that way, and I hope to bring that up too. Again, I sort of feel, even like as we're discussing this, we're discussing sort of solutions around getting points across and affecting change positively. Because we're predisposed to do that, because we're trying to, that's our job, isn't it? But still, like, winding it back to
I've actually got
our feelings,
yeah.
how we're left with it. Just before you join that, Sandra, so which makes me then sort of segues into that next question. Hopefully, it won't put you off your answer. Is that, in essence, should is the perfect sort of person naturally good for this role? Are they naturally sort of solo, so what's the word?
Soloist.
Solitary. Yeah, solitary.
Yeah.
Are we sort of loners in that sense, or are we resilient in a loner sort of way? Like, I mean, I crave the company of other people and conversation and all that sort of stuff, and the challenges that being around people throws up. But yeah, could people say of me, I'm a bit of a loner? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's two things for me that rung out. The first thing is that, and there's been debate on this, right? Because of, we had the conversation around what agile coaching means and how it shows up and how it illustrates. But in its purest form or in its just basic form, you are in some way, shape, or form, you are in a leadership capacity, right? Because you have
the
right of kind of observation and then judgment and feedback. And those are, in these organizational contexts, those are leadership roles because they're not afforded to everybody. So you're privy to a space which is not afforded to everybody of understanding, of being subject to conversations that others are not subject to, right? Whether in one-to-one situations or in a group setting, right? Or whether they be, specific figures. And oftentimes you're the one saying, hey, why don't we just share this stuff, right? So that's one. It's leadership in itself is by nature, there's a loneliness aspect to leadership. You try to eventually find a way to not make it a lonely adventure because that means you're being successful in that path, at least I believe. And then the second thing is that sometimes I think we tend to forget that this is still very much still at least the not coaching in itself, but live coaching, which what I believe agility coaching is, it's live coaching in live contexts, right? Where you're having to adapt to situations and bring people on a path and learn by doing. You're teaching them to learn by doing, right? Unpacking new ways, different ways to create value, to have conversations, to resolve conflict, to align on strategy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's still very new. So there's very few spaces which you're going to go into, which have already had and develop a comfort around, after multiple rounds of coaching, and that have that behavior of that, okay, I can see that this right now, Matt is trying to convey something to us in the most objective way. Let me just put on my active listening hat, for example. That, you often have to teach that skill and have to remind people of just those basic rules of this is, okay, these is what I expect of you. Like Dan was saying, the sort of alliances or charters or agreements, working agreements, whatever. So we're still kind of pioneers, if you will, right? In all humility. In a space where a lot of spaces we go into, these are not things that they're used to. Or if you walk into a room with 10 people, maybe 2 to 3 people have, resonate with it and have experienced it and value it, but the other 7 maybe not, right? And so you're constantly having to re-go through that sort of quote unquote brainwashing or opening of the minds of, okay, this is something that can help us get to a shared understanding, this way of thinking collectively together, et cetera. So I think if you think about those two, if you keep those in the back of your mind, being that leadership is something that can be lonely and that occasionally will be lonely, and that you are still somewhat of a pioneer because you're unpacking and using a practice which is still fairly new in organizations and yet to be accepted in a lot, right? As soon as you show up, it's like, oh, you guys give me a coach, that means I'm doing a shitty job, right? Or something's wrong, right? So if you keep those two, it helps you, I think, better, I get, at least for me, and in conversations I've had, know what support systems potentially can be there for me, or I can lean on, depending on the context, to navigate, that sort of, that's, but yeah, there's days when, oh my God, you're supporting other people. So you're taking on a lot of baggage, right? That's not necessarily conducive to you, or that you're not sometimes even equipped to handle, right? And we talked about this whole thing between fine line between therapist and coaching, et cetera. And you have to constantly fight or drown out the noise so that you focus on what you're able to handle and you're equipped to handle. But yeah, it's not, you know, it's not as easy as slicing, you know, melted butter, right? It's difficult. So
I don't know, slicing melted butter would be a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. Spooning it out would be easy.
true.
I mean, that would
Now,
be, I don't know.
now that I illustrate, now that that's the chef and Dan talking right there. I love it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I mean, that's like
Dan, what do you
Moses
think?
parting the Red Sea there. I mean, except it's butter. I mean, it reminds me of Jim Carrey and Bruce Almighty and the soup part. So except it's melted butter. That's what's going on in my head. I mean, slicing the butter, melted butter. I don't know how you do that. I think that you're, you know, I think there's certainly a loneliness to it. I think my point earlier is just one of, you know, you look at, I wonder if it means that we have not perfected our skills. Like, so first, I think community is super important. And I think that we have a community, like St. Jerry said, this here is a community for us, but we also have larger communities of people like us. And I think that that's important. But I wonder if it means we haven't perfected our skills, because I look at a coach like, they wrote a book about him, Bill Campbell, $1 trillion coach. That guy, I don't know. He's not around. Can't ask him if he felt lonely. But he certainly was celebrated and revered and not thrown out. And he was in a coaching capacity. And so I'm wondering if it's how we do things. And part of my wonder on that is, you know, I may have brought it up on the show before, but I've certainly talked to you guys about it. A friend of mine who went to Agile 2023 sent me through this word cloud that was generated from, they put up a question of what comes to mind when you think of Agile coach. And at the center, in the biggest words possible, it says ego. Then there's also stubborn, rude, irrational, lazy, ignorant, rigid, talkative, unpredictable, closed-minded, can't cross theory bridge, opinionated, anyway, secretive. There's a whole bunch of really unkind words in there. And I'm wondering, and I'm not saying this about you, Matt, specifically, or saying Jerry or me, but I'm wondering if there's something in our approach that we could change that would make it so people don't, like, I assume everybody who people said those words about is in organizations with the absolute best of intent and wants to help organizations, and they want to do the right thing. But for whatever reason, they're getting that perception. And I'm wondering if there's a change in approach in how we do that so that we get a different result and we don't feel that low, so that we don't feel that loneliness. I also think, probably, Matt, to your question of, I think the people attracted to this kind of role are the people who like to swim against the grain, and who get joy out of changing things. And so you're an odd duck. Being that way, right? Most people sort of just want to put their heads down and do their job and collect a paycheck and not ruffle, you know, they want to go up the ranks, but they want to not ruffle feathers. And so we're odd ducks in that we don't want to do that. And we don't have, I know that I won't speak for everybody. I personally have never in my life had a problem saying the emperor has no clothes. It's never been an issue for me. And there are people who on the back end and on the side will throughout my career would like ping me on whatever the messenger of the day was, whether it was MSM, whatever the messenger was, would be like, oh, thank God you said that.
Yeah.
But a friend pointed out to me at one point in my career, said, you know, people, they thank you for this, but where are they? Notice that nobody else is saying those things. They might say, they might appreciate it and they might tell you thank you, but they're not jumping behind. No one's jumping behind you. So anyway, and so that is the nobody jumping behind you is a lonely feeling. And there's a part of me over time that has built up the strength. And actually the sort of, I pride myself on, yep, that's right. I'm out there out front. Nobody's behind me. That's because I'm willing to say the thing they're all thinking and nobody will say. But that comes at great personal risk.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And I think there isn't an expectation, isn't there, for people to jump behind you. Maybe people to sidle up and edge their way slowly behind you is what we're looking for, maybe over time, because we know it takes time, and that's the thing, isn't it? I think some of the things that you've both said there are giving me like a broader perspective on what I've been saying and how I'm feeling and so on. Like the thing about like there should be, it's interesting to have the biggest word in the word cloud was ego. Um, which is very interesting because after you sort of feel like you have to have a humility. You have to be prepared to take the blows because you go into every place knowing I'm going to take the blows. It makes me feel like then Dan, when you said like jump to the conclusion that maybe we should take an inward look at ourselves. Like I do wonder, and then and now this is all about ego now, but I have to differentiate myself from some factions that those people who are giving that feedback are giving feedback about people they didn't have a good time with. But humans, it's easiest easier for us to recollect the bad times. So when someone says agile coach, well, I know what one isn't, and because it felt like a description of what one shouldn't be there.
Or what they're envious of also. Because like I said, sometimes like
Yeah.
I'll give you an anecdote, a real short, and I'll kick it back to you. I was in a mission, right? Where I very distinctly remember, my initial scope was a program, right, of about 120 people, so to speak, strategic one, whatever. And I remember the CTO, my first sort of passing through the hallway moments, right?
Yeah.
He passes through, I pass through. And there's kind of like that look like, okay, who the hell is this guy? He's not really one to really be outwardly welcoming. And I remember I was like, okay, that usually those are some of the first telltale signs for me in terms of culture and an environment. It's like the people who walk by and say hello, leadership people, especially, right? The people invite you for drink, smile at you, just basic stuff. And then I remember fast forward, and he happened to actually be the boss of my sponsor, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember fast forward, couple of months, we start to gain some momentum. Some of the really top leaders, so maybe his plus two, like two stairways above him, come to one of our events, and obviously those moments define a lot. Sometimes they offer us a great pathway because we get to start interconnecting with other leaderships, other people's in the ecosystems who are seen as, whatever. And I remember having a very in-depth conversation with one of the managing directors, right? It's a pretty large company. And at the end, I remember we fist bumped each other, which obviously is a sign of you're my guy, right? You're a pal, or I'm connecting with you, whatever. And I remember the very next week, this same guy came up to me and offered me coffee, right? And I remember making that distinct connection and just people's, gradual kind of change of behavior because of their change of perception of who I
Yeah.
was or what my value was or how I was seen by others or whatever. And so that's something, for example, managing that in itself, it's like, okay, do people really value what I do and even who I am for me, or right? And so that can be very lonely in itself. But and obviously, you have a support system around you and you believe in what you do, but we're human beings at the end of the day, right?
But doesn't
We
that
go home.
describe everybody's journey of becoming established in an organization? Just
Mm,
that, like in your scenario there, often we'll have to accelerate that to try and get cachet more quickly. But I think
yeah.
everyone sort of goes through that, and everyone feels a loneliness about that.
Mm,
Am I making the right connections? And I think there's I think differently about where we are is that we have to probably put those at jeopardy. Like we might
yeah.
make connections. You
Yeah.
might made connections with that person that week and have
Mhm,
them reinforced the following week. And
mhm.
then the week after that, you might have to put that at jeopardy um by attacking a sacred cow for that person.
Yeah.
you know, pointed out an elephant in the room for that person. And I think that's where that's like, for me, that's that bigger aspect of loneliness, is that like, you know, like our own personalities and the people who we are, we can on a personal level create a relationship very quickly. If we're sort of like a personable person, an outgoing person, so on, and we have to be sort of fairly charming to get on quickly and establish these lines of communication. But then we go against the norm. The social norm is that we're supposed to constantly reinforce those to ingratiate ourselves. But the following week, the likes of any good, like the likes of us ourselves, might put that at risk by saying, yeah, well, having a conversation with that person we've just built a relationship and saying like, well, yeah, I know, I get what you mean, but look at all these other possibilities, or look at actually how you're cutting your nose off to spite your face, and look at, I'm going to say XYZ that no one has ever said to you, and now you're thinking like, hang on, are you on my side or not? And I'm like, well, I am ultimately on your side because I'm pointing out these things that people won't. And I think that's one of the lonely things. One of the things I wanted to say about what you said earlier, and I know we've crashed through the half hour. But again, that thing about leadership and leadership's lonely. Again, I sort of want to probably describe that in a few different, well, at least one other way, is that, because that reminds me, Dan was saying he was reminded of a film. It reminds me of a film where I don't know if you've seen Moneyball, one of my favorite ever films.
Yeah.
Where
You love that one.
Yeah, there's a scene where like Billy Bean says to so Brad Pitt says to Jonah Hill, because Jonah Hill's character is an amalgamation of multiple characters. You should go on the road with the team. And he's like, okay, fine. And why don't and Jonah Hill says back to Brad, why don't you ever go on the road, Billy Bean? And he's like, well, I don't want to get too close to him. I might have to cut him. That's a loneliness of leadership. But I don't think that's like a generative loneliness of leadership. I think the loneliness of leadership in the aspect that I'm thinking of there is like when we're sort of like saying, I agree with you that we will often fill leadership positions or be proxy for leadership positions or have to go up and down different levels of hierarchy so that we're associated with leadership. I think ours, for me, is more like we have to create this insulation, or we have to create this sort of fire gap whereby, like, because the relationship I'm building with someone, I want them to be a leader. So if I fill the gap where they can step into to be that leader, there's no room for them. So I've got to remain a little bit struggling for the right word. I've got to create that space and try and usher them into it. And the thing is the other thing as well is when they usher them into it, is also that I think this that conjures up the loneliness, just intrinsically. The loneliness is that I shouldn't be there anymore because I'll be a crutch. So for me, there's a couple of like personas that not everyone likes this analogy, but it's like the Nanny McPhee thing. Like when you think about Nanny McPhee, it's like when you need me and don't want me, I'll be here. When you want me but don't need me, I'll have to go. And that describes to me a lonely existence. Do you know what I mean?
You're not the first person to use that analogy with regard
I'm not,
to,
no.
And I agree.
Like
yeah. And it is a loneliness. And I think the parallel to leadership for me is as a coach, I have one-on-one conversations or even group conversations, and I know either what one group thinks about another group or what one person thinks about another group, and I can't share that. Just like there are things, and I believe in transparency, but as a leader, one of the things I learned in a big organization is I came at it from, I believe in transparency. And so I'm not one of those people that says, I believe in transparency, and I say that, and then I act a different way. I act that way. And so I was an open book. That's a problem. Like there are things in leadership and should know that you can't tell other people. because you can't, as a leader up the org told me, like, you don't want to whipsaw your people. And so, yeah, there may be things in consideration, like companies are almost always considering M&A activity, whether they're going to be acquired or whatever. It's always under consideration. There's always some talks about it. If you always disclose that, people would fear that their company wasn't going to exist. So you keep, because the chances of that coming to fruition are like 0.1%. Like, so you don't tell people that the conversations are happening because like that this stuff always happens. And so the same, so you have that information and
instead.
and so the same is true. Like what you're talking about, Matt, about that buffer. I agree. Like, you have to have that buffer. And the hard part is that I have to care and want every person I'm talking to succeed, knowing that person A hates person B's guts and they're saying bad things about each other. And I would love to bring them together, but I can't say, hey, did you know that you guys are saying these things about each other? And I think you could just have a conversation and fix it. That's not going to work. So you have to, like, it is a lonely place of like, oh, I know you both want the same thing, but you're just not talking, and you're bad mouthing each other. And if we could fix that, we get past it. But I have to live this world of, I have this knowledge and I can't tell you both that I have this knowledge. For me, that's part of the loneliness, is I have all this information and I can't share it. And I have to constantly be thinking when I'm in conversations, okay, I have to keep my distance. I can't share everything I know. In fact, I ethically don't want to cross that line. I have to keep this neutral person thing.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
That follows on really well from episode 11 though, doesn't it? You know, like, what we can say to the people in those situations is we can sort of, you know, put a positive slant on the fact that, well, yeah, you know, everyone's someone's arsehole. I'm someone's arsehole right now. Someone hates me, you know, and just sort of like, we don't have to say the person that they don't get on with. Again, it also speaks to when you go into an executive room or a board room and you find out something that's sensitive and to take it out. And the thing that you don't want to take it out because it might stir some emotion, whereas everybody knows, like you said, those conversations are happening. Every grown up, every adult knows those conversations are happening somewhere. Their response to it is that, well, the people who are talking about that and trying to make some of those decisions are assholes. And it's like, again, it's like, well, everyone's someone's arsehole. Don't let that worry. But what can you control? Let's focus on that. Which I sort of feel like that's one of those situations where actually I feel less lonely because it draws me towards them and I can help them figure that out. And that gives me a rosy glow. But no, but I don't think the not telling people about everything that's going on is making me any more lonely, because most of those things, I think, well, I just assume you're a grown up. You might not always act like a grown up, but you are one, and you know all of that stuff. So that just if I can help you reconcile yourself to it and get on with it anyway, get on with controlling the things you can control, that makes me feel a bit better. I did want to mention one of those other, so there's the dynamic fee one, and there's one that I've spoken about before as well, like someone I have in the back of my mind who also feels like a lonely character, that I also think is one of the roles that we play as a coach, or, you know, consultant or continuous improvement person, is that I spoke to someone once about what's he called, the LG guy, Sacha Baron Cohen.
Yeah.
So like, you think about Sacha Baron Cohen and the comedy he performs, which I think is, again, I'm only looking at you, Sanjay, because you live in France. You don't have to know any of this sort of stuff, but I think it's like a French school that is like the clown, and it's like a really big tradition.
Yeah.
And he went and studied in France with some great guru of this. But like what he does is he, like, a bit, I suppose, a bit, might be going a bit too far, but a bit like Sacha Baron Cohen, through his character, holds a mirror up to society. He lures people in to really sort of let go and show what they're thinking. And now I'm not going to go that next step on, because I am a big advocate of how do I know what I think until I see what I say. So actually, these people who have then got it outside of their head and see it on the big screen might think, oh my God, what was I doing? So I don't know whether they truly believe what they say, but he holds that mirror up. The thing about holding that mirror up often, and you see it in his films, it puts him in actual danger.
Hey, for sure.
You
Same
know,
thing.
and that feels like that's a lonely existence. He's not
Yeah.
going to want to put too many people at danger.
You got to have courage. You mentioned that keyword earlier, courage.
Yeah,
That mirror can be very heavy
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah,
yeah, the what you hope to, because at the end of the day, the difference between Sacha Baron Cohen and us is that he is he's performing art, you know, at a deepest sense, and then hoping he's sharing something with the public, and then whatever comes of it, I think he's ready to deal with in whatever shape or form or cope with
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
We, on the other hand, we put the hold the mirror up, hoping to help bring about progress or change in some way, shape, or form. And so the success, the sort of risk mitigation or the value of holding that mirror up,
But don't you think that's what he's doing?
I think intrinsically, yes. I mean, obviously Sacha Baron Cohen is also part of a business model. I think he's there to also sell, you know, I
Well,
think
so are we.
he's a
I
provocateur
think,
by nature.
but so the tension there, I think,
Yeah,
is,
for
and this is
sure.
the thing about the tension, is that he is not doing big Hollywood blockbusters. He is
No.
not, Sacha Baron Cohen is not a beloved Hollywood movie star.
Yeah.
He is very idiosyncratic. He is, I think he's viewed as an oddity. And he is trying to teach the world some lessons about itself.
Yeah.
I think that's very much like what we do. And I as well, and I've written and posted about this a lot, is that I think, you know, like a lot of what we do can be summed up through the arts. Because and it can be polarizing, like art can. You know,
Mm.
I don't want to get too highfalutin about that, but
No, no, no. If you draw the analogy back to what Dan was saying earlier about the using the Cantor model, the four different postures, the observer, the contrarian, what was the two others, Dan? You
Mover,
remember?
follower, bystander, opposer.
Right, right. I think those reflect a lot of the different postures. You can pretty much put coaches in those different postures as far as like what they're comfortable wearing as a hat, right? Depending on just their own personal, you know, personalities, right? Their own backstory, um, their
yeah,
history as coaches, and the environments they walk into. I think we may probably navigate through different hats, you know, depending on the context or whatever. But Sacha Baron Cohen is by nature, he's an in your face, hey, you know,
yeah,
really
yeah,
sarcastic
yeah,
way of just putting egg on your face and showing you what the hell you just did or didn't do.
yeah, yeah,
And so I think that, you know, there's to us, there's a, you know, there's always a risk factor we have to keep in mind, right? Because
yeah,
we want to, not only is there I'm not even just talking about the economic part of, okay, I want this mission to go longer than 3 months, but also the
yeah,
fact that if I'm only here 3 months, I've spent 3 months of not wasted time because I do, like you say, plant seeds, but I'm not even seeing the immediate effects of what I've helped plant it. And I think that's
yeah,
that there is something in terms of ego that we do want to see a little bit of the initial fruits of our labor, which I
yeah,
think gives us strength to carry on to the next mission or the next situation or the next context or whatever.
yeah,
I think, you know, so so that's a way for me, one of my talking about coping, you know, in terms of loneliness and all these kind of things that we go through, is always reflecting back on my journey, seeing everything I've gone through and where I am now. And then that often usually gives me strength and gives me, you know, gives me sort of the little umph that I need to deal with whatever is going on in the present. Just reminding myself that this is the present and there's going to be a tomorrow, there's going to be a day after tomorrow, and there was a
yeah,
yesterday, right? And so that allows me sometimes to just be able to separate the tension of the today or the week
yeah,
from, you know, the broader perspective, because you know, it gives me reminds me I'm on a journey, right? And that there's going to be ebbs and flows to that, right? I'm going to have peaks and valleys, and I try to stay as, even keel as I can, but I can't control, right? All I can do is just, pick my battles, as you say, pick my
Yeah.
battles. And some days I feel I have the energy to hold up the mirror. Other days I just don't. That's just the reality. I think, there's things we deal on a personal level that sometimes don't give you that energy. And people see that, right? People, like,
Yeah.
I'm a
They have
very
to, don't they?
open, kind of joyous, gregarious guy. And people have seen those weeks where I've been kind of don't have that energy, which they've expected out of me. And it's like, oh, are you okay? Right. And so sometimes that also, having, again, that initial community and that larger community also that you can talk to these things about as well. I think that's, those are some of the things we could definitely, lean on and in these lonely journeys, so to speak. But we're never really quite really lonely all the way. There's always someone we can,
I don't think we're ever alone, are we?
yeah,
You can be
yeah.
alone in a crowded room, can't you, I suppose?
And
But yeah, I don't think
Let me
we don't have to be lonely because we're never really alone, are we?
let me jump in on the art comparison thing. Because you guys got to say,
Gotcha.
I want to say on this. So I absolutely see it. And so, but I also start going back to the things I've been talking about in terms of, I look at, you have a Sacha Baron Cohen, who's very much in the vein of like a modest proposal, satirical, really in your face. But then you've also got more subtle ways of change, right? I mean, I go back and watch old episodes of Cheers, and they have jokes about homosexuality and the gay guy, and like, oh God, can't be friends with you because you're gay, and like this is like acceptable, and this is how they do things. And then you go over time, and you've got shows like Will and Grace where you have gay characters, and you start over time without being in your face about it necessarily. You start introducing these concepts slowly, and you build, and it takes a lot longer, and it's not in your face. But the arts can absolutely change by doing things very subtly, or you can be in your face like Sacha Baron Cohen. Both of them work, and they work in different ways. And I do think there's a seed, Matt, and this may be my closing as well, but, also, Matt, you were talking about planting seeds. And yes, I think there are times I've certainly planted seeds and things happen, and people will tell me about it, like, oh, that thing you said, and then you got thrown out, like they're doing that thing. And so I think back to my own career and things that have happened to me. There have been people who pointed stuff out, and in the moment, I think, what a fucking asshole that person is. They're totally wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. And then years later, I'm like, yeah, they had a point, and I probably should have listened. But I wasn't, like, in that moment, I wasn't ready to hear it. And I'll just also close with, Patrick Lencioni, his book Naked Consulting, which I haven't read, but keep meaning to. I believe some of the premises, sort of being naked and vulnerable with the client, and taking that perspective. I think that just speaks to the fact that there is a certain like there's a vulnerability and a loneliness to being the type of consultants that we are, right? It's that we're there to help you grow into a different place. And that can be a very lonely place, because you can get to places of planting seeds where people don't want to hear it. And how you do it is going to be, and I'm not saying one style is better or worse than the other. There's part of me that wishes I were the type of person that could tell someone to go to hell in a way that they'd enjoy the journey. I can't do it. Like, not yet. I haven't built that skill, but I know people that can tell people to go to hell in a way that they're like, oh, wow, thanks. I'll right off to hell. No problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll wrap up. You're gonna wrap up.
Yeah, no, I'll jump in and you close it out since.
So mine was based on a lot of what
Go ahead.
you said just prior to that. Then is that about being lonely in crowded spaces and stuff like that, and not having to be lonely and having those communities and so on. Like, one of the reasons I think that I've wanted to talk about this, and it was a big subject, and there's loads more to talk about. We've run over our usual half hour, but like, being lonely in a crowded space, that sort of notion reminds me of a lot of the infighting I feel that there is now in the agile coaching, scrum mastering community. And I just really want to be supportive of people who are thinking of coming into this community. And I think if only one of them, because that means we've got our listener, But if only one of them hears this and sees that what we're talking about is that they might come into this and they might hear some people be dismissive of them. That's actually that don't be disheartened by it. We all go through it, and it's part of actually what you go through when you go into an engagement with a client. You get dismissed a lot in the things that you say and the things that you do and the things that you're trying to help people come to terms with. Well, I suppose what I want to say to them is you will feel lonely. You don't have to feel lonely if you don't want to, because you might wear it as a badge. And there are people like us that want to help get you through it. Do you know what I mean? Because loneliness is your friend. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about feeling like it. Don't feel you need to feel like it if you don't want to. There are people like us out there that will help you come to terms with it, that will help you like it, that will help you build that resilience. And I think if this us chatting, like you said earlier, Sanjay, and we've all said, is that like we're a little cohort now, and that's brilliant, and we give ourselves confidence. And I used to have on engagements, I used to with lots of people. I might have even said this to you at one point, Dan. Is one of the things that I say on engagements when I'm with multiple coaches is that as long as one of us is in the life raft, when the others have fallen overboard and are in the sea, as long as one of us is in here, can drag the others back in, we'll be all right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's what we as a community should do.
Yeah.
And I think, like you're saying, if you go into an engagement and you can get a few people that are like before when Dan, you said there's no one behind me, but there's no one's going to jump behind you. But if you can get a few people sidling up behind you and you can get them in the life raft, just in case you fall overboard and they can pull you back in, I think you're on a winner. That's what I think.
That was beautifully said. I'll just we talked about it I enjoyed the conversation quite a bit there. I think, like I said, I'm hoping this is a spark plug to more conversations around this topic that are being had, that should be had, I believe. I think a lot of people see different aspects of this, the fact that they can help bring about change, they help support others. But there's, this specific part of it is part of the journey, which is kind of invisible still very much. And should be kind of like better understood, better talked about, written about, etc. But my closeout is, the one thing you can hang your hat on, and this is irrespective of any practice, any job, any role, any endeavor or journey you want to go on, is just, and I think that's the hardest part for all of us, is just being authentic. It's finding whatever, however you get to that comfort space of just being you and being accepting of who you are and what you're comfortable exploring, doing, experimenting, not doing. That's the best space to evolve in. And I think that at the end of the day, you may feel like really down about a specific day or a week or even a mission, but you can always hang your hat on the fact that you were you and that you didn't compromise, right? And because you don't get a lot of do-overs, unfortunately, right? In life, you just get attempts in a different form, but so that's what I would say. And that's the essence of leadership, is right, that authentic, there's, you could be Sacha Baron Cohen, but you can only be you.
Yeah.
You can get inspiration from a Matt, from a Dan, based on their experiences and what they go through, but those can only be petals to the central rose that is you, right? And so I think, that's what a lot of coaches, and especially in our space where there's a lot of thought leadership and, starification of all the people that have this, wealth amount of knowledge. We talk about John Cutler, but, he's developed the art of perspective by being himself. And I think that's what everybody needs to really work on and find as they help support others, which in itself is not the easiest job in these, stress-packed environments. So, but yeah, that's we'll close on that. very much, looking forward to season 2. Obviously it's a wrap for season 1, if I may, right? It's this,
I think the way we're doing this is the penultimate. So this is 11.
Well, we're
And
gonna do a
12 will
bonus.
be what?
Is this 11? I thought this was 12.
I thought we said we wanted to do the finale as the special guest that we
Oh, okay.
haven't said.
Yeah,
I can't
do it.
remember. I thought that was the.
I
I
don't
thought that
remember if
was
it's
what you had
11 or
said.
12, but it's penultimate. It's penultimate for sure.
Surprise
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out in the text chat after this, but it's either 11 or 12,
This is
depending on which
12.
one we release.
This is 12. The last one we haven't posted yet was 11. This is going to be 12. And so it'll be
There
the
you go.
penultimate for sure. Yeah.
Executive decision there by Sanjiri. I'll go with that one.
All right,
And
then,
then we're
then-
going to do a
then-
bonus. But we're going to do a bonus now, a bonus retro on
Yeah.
our first season doing this thing.
Yeah.
I think that'll be at 8.
Definitely.
Can't wait for that.
So then this is 12, and the last one is the penultimate. Then the last one is 11. So the last one is so in that case, I'll say the last one with John Cutler. That one is 11. So that one I'm going to publish, and then 12 is this one, and we'll publish this one this week. Or I'm sorry,
Cool.
next week after. Yeah.
Cool.
Brilliant.
All right,
Brilliant.
gents.
Thanks, chaps.
All right.
See y'all soon.
See ya.
Ciao, ciao.